Hi friends, my name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. So I wanted to share with you this video. You may have already seen it, of Ilhan Omar interrogating, you could probably call it, Elliott Abrams, who is the point man for this US-backed coup in Venezuela. He has a history of war crimes, genocidal sort of actions, arming death squads. It all poses as humanitarian aid, etc. And he's supposedly, intervening in Venezuela for humanitarian reasons, which is what the US empire always gives as an excuse when they're overthrowing democratically elected governments, of which they've overthrown or attempted to overthrow 81 since 1946. You couldn't trust Elliott Abrams as far as you could throw him. Anyway, this interrogation, this sort of questioning in the Foreign Affairs Committee by Representative Omar is really very good, and I wish it happened more often. And I think, she's sincere. Sometimes they go through these actions as if they're, pretending that they care, but it's just sort of like really just a display, but I think she really does care. And I still think the Democratic Party will try and get rid of her as soon as they can, along with anybody else who's against, because the Democratic Party is totally fine with regime change, in quotes. They're totally fine with overthrowing a democratically elected president, which Maduro is, an election which was the Carter group, Jimmy Carter's organization, I can't remember what it's called, basically went there and oversaw that last election, and I think the election before that and the one before that, but they said about the last election in particular that it's the best transparent election they've ever been attended, basically. So it's far, far more transparent than US elections, right? So it's the irony of the US, talk about pot calling the kettle black. Anyway, but this is what they do. It's just all lies and propaganda, manufacturing consent for an overthrowing of another democratically elected government, and once again for oil, just like they did with Iraq. And they've appointed this. They've groomed this guy Juan Guaido for years, and he's appointed himself unelected as the president of Venezuela. He's unelected and he's self-appointed, and hardly anybody knows who he is, and there's really hardly any internal support. And here is the US appointing a war criminal to go in and help overthrow Maduro and the Venezuelan government. It's just appalling, and this is happening in real time, right before our eyes. They're not even trying to hide it either, that it's for oil and for gold. And the West, many Western allies are on board. My government, which is just a sham of a government, is on board with that. The opposition leaders, I haven't heard them condemning that this US-backed coup. Canada is on board because it wants Venezuelan gold. There are Western, like the Bank of England is withholding $1 billion or more worth of gold of Venezuela, and other governments are doing the same. It's just appalling. But anyway, I won't go on any longer. I've talked about this before, and I hope you enjoy this video. I'm sure the Democratic Party, if you're not on board with regime change, then they'll do what they can to get you out of there. And just by the way, even though they decided, the Congress decided they didn't want a military intervention in Venezuela, doesn't mean that there won't be all sorts of nefarious activities by the CIA, which has been going on now for a long, long time, right? There'll be, special squads going in there. There'll be all sorts of things happening. arms being shipped nefariously, which has already happened. They've been intercepted by Venezuela. There'll be all sorts of things done. If it's not an overt military intervention, it will be going on, as the CIA always does, as the US always does, covert operations until they get their way. So do what you can to support Maduro by sharing, by the Venezuelan people really, by sharing anything that is independent news, like from Venezuela Analysis or the Empire Files, or by Abby Martin or Ben Norton or Max Blumenthal, all those people, right, that I mention regularly. Do what you can to change this manufactured consent that's happening right now by the mainstream media, the propaganda. And just remember that Congress is totally fine with overthrowing yet another democratically elected government in a sovereign country against the will of the people, and they're just pretending that they're not for military action, but it's going to happen anyway. I just hope that I think Russia will be keeping an eye on this, because each country that's overthrown, there is more, it's as much a danger to any country that has not submitted yet to the US. So it's in the interest of any country that has not submitted. My country has. We're just a colony of the US empire. But any country that hasn't, like Iran or Syria or Russia or China or whatever, they're all in danger, of course, of the US and their aims for global domination. And that's not hyperbole. Global domination is what they seek. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. So check out this video. It's really great. She really holds his feet to the fire, and he refuses to answer questions. That's all I want to say. Okay, enjoy.
Chairman, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
That
was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and
yes or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question, because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. That is my question. Will you make sure that human rights are not violated and that we uphold international and human rights?
I suppose there is a question in there, and the answer is that the entire thrust of American policy in Venezuela is to support the Venezuelan people's effort to restore democracy to their country. That's our policy.
I don't think anybody disputes that. The question I had for you is that does the interest of the United States include protecting human rights and include protecting people against genocide?
That is always the position of the United States.
Thank you. I yield back my time.